So you might already know who Ilhan Omar is if you're clicking on a video called The Treatment of Ilhan Omar. But if you don't, Ilhan Omar is a U.S. representative from Minnesota's 5th District. She was elected on the Democratic Farmer Labor Party line, which is something I've only glanced into, and is the first Somali American elected to legislative office in the U.S., the first nationalized citizen from Africa elected to Congress. Along with Rashida Tlaib, she is one of the first 2 Muslim women in Congress and is the first minority woman to serve as a representative for Minnesota. I just want to take a second here to say that it is great to see an electorate that more closely resembles the actual makeup of the country it governs, but 2019 is this staggering number that makes it feel like we've all been asleep at the wheel this whole time, and things like this should have happened long ago. About a month ago, in a now deleted tweet, Omar responded to a Glenn Greenwald tweet highlighting the hypocrisy of those in Congress who attack their colleagues' rights to free speech and try to silence any attempt to criticize the actions of the Israeli government with the very succinct and correct answer, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby," with a musical note, a reference to AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, which first of all is a badass answer, go off queen. But what happened next is everyone in the United States government went fucking insane. Now, for those in the cheap seats, criticizing the Israeli government and its actions is not the same thing as criticizing the Jewish faith or its people, and it should be a given, but I will be entirely clear that I do believe in Israel's right to exist, and the rights of the Israeli and Jewish people worldwide. The problem is the country's government, and this is a perfect opportunity to mention that the end goal is no countries and no borders. The problem isn't that there's just one country that exists. The problem is that any countries exist. And I should make it clear that when I use the word Israel, I mean the state of Israel. And when I say the Israeli government, I mean just that, the government of the state of Israel under the current Netanyahu administration. Okay, baseline established. I do understand that despite what I've already said, criticizing the Israeli government is still a very tricky and delicate operation. It's like walking through a minefield of discourse, and to explain the full conflict and controversy-rife history of the country would probably take a very long time, and is a subject I will admit I am not very well versed in. But more or less, many of the problems have existed since the country's inception in 1948. In fact, there have been violent clashes between Jews and Arabs in the region recorded as far back as the end of the 19th century. And this is where I mentioned the recent United Nations Human Council report that said that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, deliberately shot at children and people with disabilities, and if you watched any of the coverage of the Gaza border protests from last year, you saw this. Israel is an apartheid state, and among other things, this is what the Israeli government has been doing for years. At its worst, it can best be categorized as genocide, and they largely get away with it because their strongest supporters, the United States government, has been paid off to be complicit, paid off by AIPAC, and those who don't fall in line, as we're seeing now, risk seriously endangering their careers, social stature, right to a platform, or even their well-being. You might have heard of the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. They're committed to promoting various forms of boycotts and protests against Israel until the country meets what the campaign describes as Israel's obligations under international law, or in other words, when they stop killing innocent people who just want their land to stop being stolen, among other goals. Well, no American politician has made any public statement of support of the movement, and even 26 states have passed anti-BDS legislation, which is an obvious free speech violation and like the actual meaning of the law where the government is not allowed to silence your speech. This is an example of that. And if we're going to be really pedantic, remember when Rosa Luxemburg said freedom is always the freedom of the dissenters? She means you can judge how free a society is by whether or not marginalized voices are given a legit platform, and if their concerns are actually taken into consideration when deciding how to organize your society. And that's what this is. That's what this is! And by the way, where are the IDW nerds to defend Omar or BDS or anyone from this kind of bullshit? Or is their free speech absolutism just a shield for them to be openly bigoted or racist or turf or whatever bullshit? Because they've been pretty quiet since this whole thing went down. In fact, Ben Shapiro said this.
So Ilhan Omar tweeted out, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," with a little music symbol. Now, as a Jew, one of the oft-used anti-Semitic tropes, I mean, this has been true for thousands of years, is that the Jews control the monetary systems with their shekels, that the Jews are an evil, nefarious force behind world events spreading around money, and that the reason that people support the Jews is because they've been corrupted by the Jew gold. It's been the Jew gold behind Republican support for the state of Israel, which, of course, is a complete lie. The vast majority of Americans support Israel and support Jews because they're not anti-Semitic and because they recognize that Israel is fighting against some of the worst people on planet Earth.
No, No, Ben Shapiro, you are wrong. Like you are about so many things. She is not actually criticizing Israel or the Jewish people, but how people in the public eye, especially those in our government, are essentially barred from criticizing Israel. All in one sentence that is also a very well-liked and recognizable lyric from a 90s song. Try to pull that off, you hack cool kid philosopher. I can't wait until the reactionary algorithms of YouTube find this video and I'm banned from the platform. By the way, when I was writing this, my spell check, or autocorrect we call it now, kept trying to change Ilhan Omar's name to Owen. What's that thing that AOC said about algorithms being racist? Regardless, and again, it's not anti-Semitic to criticize the actions of the Israeli government, but regardless of that, she isn't even criticizing Israel or its government in this tweet, but AIPAC, which is designed to flood our government with enough money to shut up or drown anyone. Now, we'd all expect right-wing assholes to go for Omar, but you know who hasn't defended her? The mainstream Democrats. A few have, Bernie has, AOC has, but at the same time, H.R. 1 was supposed to be introduced into the House, which is a bill that means to try to solve some of the problems with voting rights and campaign finance and redistricting. At the time of this recording, Nancy Pelosi and the top Dems are wasting time in using it to vote on a resolution to force Omar to apologize, which she already has, and to condemn anti-Semitism, which again, criticizing an organization designed to squash free speech and let a literal genocide just continue is not anti-Semitism. You might have also seen this tweet, which is also being woefully misinterpreted, probably knowingly. Well, she's not implying in some crafty anti-Semitic way Jewish people have some dual allegiance to Israel, but that America's governmental leaders have dual allegiance with the Israeli government over the concerns of their own constituencies, which they do because of AIPAC. And Omar is just doing her job in voicing the concern of her constituency. You know, plenty of Jewish Americans are critical of Israel. You know, there's a lot of Jews in Israel that are critical of Israel, but instead of defending her, the Democrats are smearing each other and backbiting, which makes them a bunch of fucking cowards. And they're not going to stop being fucking cowards because they're paid to be fucking cowards. And they're not going to give that up because they fucking love money. And many of them are very, very religious and actually do believe the Bible is fact and believe that Israel is key to all of it, which is also the reason they're not going to do anything about climate change, because they actually do believe and pretty much want this to be the end times. And getting back to how no American politician publicly supports BDS, there have been reports of ex-Mossad agents actually targeting those who do support BDS. I keep thinking not only about how American Jewish people who do not support the Israeli government feel about all this. I mean, I bet they don't feel very represented right now, but how American Muslims are feeling. If someone were to criticize the actions of, I don't know, let's say the Saudi government, no one would call it Islamophobic. And I know this because there's been a lot of people criticizing the actions of the Saudi government lately. I mean, it must not feel great to see one of the first two Muslim women elected to Congress being attacked like this by even those in her own party, and to see the president calling for Omar to step down or to be stripped of office probably doesn't make one feel very welcome in this country. And underneath all of this, that is the message the United States government seems to be sending. Good time to mention that for the vast majority, politicians are pretty much detestable pieces of shit. There is probably a lot that can be said about whatever deficiency these people have that makes them want to seek a position of elected dominance and control over others, largely without their consent. The end goal is pretty obvious here. The Dem elites, influenced by AIPAC money, want Omar off the House Foreign Affairs Committee. They won't defend her, and honestly, all this rhetoric might lead to someone killing her, because no one with power in the United States government will rock the boat and take issue with Israel or their government or the Netanyahu administration. They're all a bunch of fucking paid-off swine cowards. And if you have any integrity or care about free speech or care about the rights and freedoms of all people, then you should stand with Ilhan Omar.
Thank you.